Hello aspirants, looking at the current affairs for 15/10/2018, the Hindu analysis. So these are the important news items to what has been picked up from the Hindu newspaper. Let's look at them in detail. The first news item, in 1994 Assam fake encounter, the Major General 6 others get life term. So here we have the army court in Assam which has actually ordered the dismissal of the service and also the life imprisonment of 7 personnel. So one of them is Major General as well, because these people were accused of killing 5 people in the fake encounter back in 1994. So it's almost like 24 years old case which is being dismissed right now, and they've been also been given with a life imprisonment. And it's also been believed that, and moreover it is in the Dangari area of Assam, and it's also believed that these people were the leaders of all Assam Students Union. So this was one of the investigations to which was been concluded by July 27. And right now, to also ensure that their custodials or also the killings of the people would not be misused by using the powers. So on limelight of this life imprisonment of 7 persons which has been coming from the Army Assam court. So that's about it, and that's it.
24 साल बाद असम के फर्जी एनकाउंटर में फैसला आया है। सेना के 3 बड़े अफसरों को सजा सुनाई गई है। 1994 में असम के तिनसुकिया में 5 युवकों का फर्जी एनकाउंटर किया गया था। आर्मी कोर्ट ने एक मेजर जनरल, 2 कर्नल रैंक के अधिकारियों समेत 7 सैनिकों को उम्र कैद की सजा सुनाई है। ये मामला 90 के दशक में उस दौर का है जब असम में उग्रवाद चरम पर था। आरोप है कि मेजर जनरल ए.के. लाल, कर्नल थॉमस मैथ्यू, कर्नल एन.एस. शिमरून, जेसीओ दलीप सिंह, एनसीओ जगदेव सिंह, अलविंदर सिंह और शिवेंद्र सिंह ने फर्जी एनकाउंटर किया। आरोप है कि चाय बागान के मैनेजर की हत्या के मामले में सेना के अफसरों ने 5 युवाओं का फर्जी एनकाउंटर किया। मरने वाले 5 युवा ऑल असम स्टूडेंट यूनियन के सदस्य थे।
And the next news item, Me Too allegations fabricated, MJ Akbar. So we know that MJ Akbar was being prominently there in the news with the sexual harassment, to where the women journalists have been talking about the stories to what they have faced in terms of the harassment from Mr. that is a Minister of State External Affairs MJ Akbar. So he's been not there at the time when the allegations were going on, or as he was moved on to Africa or the particular kind of an Indian delegations. As he's been back from Africa, he's saying that to whatever the women journalists have been talking about the sexual harassment to what they have faced by him or fabricated. There's no proof or there's nothing where he has been performed and written. So he's also making it clear that especially the 2 allegations which has been coming from Priya Ramani and also the Ghazala Wahab would be taken into the allegations. So that's purely not to what he's done, and it was completely the 2-page statement to what is being given, and this particular lawyer would be looking on to the matter right now. So there's again a counter kind of in reply to what has been faced by him as an allegations. So that's about it. That's it. And next one, windmills not so green for wildlife. So here it is about the installations of the windmill, so which is safe for the renewable energy. But right now, apart from that, there is also the danger which has been posed for the wildlife in the forest. So here they're saying that the direct impact plates and also the turbines actually are driving away the animals to the infringes of the forest. So this is actually increasing the man-animal conflict. We know that from quite some times the man and the animal conflict are getting increased of, and they're saying that this is one of the reasons to why it has been taken and why is it the insurance being increased in return. So here it is about the 2-year research project which was was done by SACON, that's a Salim Ali Center for Arithronology and also the Natural History. So this was actually commissioned by the state government agency, and now they have found that not only do the windmills lead the bird and bat mortalities through collisions, because you can see that the windmills are also leading for the dead and also the birds and the bats in return. So this also made the birds and animals avoid these noisy patches. So not getting very closer to these particular areas have been completely avoided by the animals in return. So such avoidance and the movement of to fringes might actually increase the conflict with the humans. The more and more they have been avoided in those particular area might definitely increase the conflict with the humans. And this is a kind of in protocols which has been called as a policy guidelines before directing the forest land for the wind farms. So year after, before they divert any of the forest lands for the wind farms, they have to take these considerations, and they have to ensure a proper policy framework, and they have to do what they have to do on a proper aspects. So this is something, the study which was being conducted, and this study is being funded by the State Forest Department of Karnataka Renewable Energy Development Limited and also the National Institute of Wind Energy. So this is a collaborations of the study which has been taken place, and this is like the study which has been taken place with funded by the collaboration of these particular institutions. So So that's all about it. And the next one, 2013 Justice Verma panel report wanted changes to sexual harassment law. So this with respect to the panel, that is Mr. Verma panel, which was been set up back in 2013. He was a justice in Britain, and here he was also making a statements or getting the changes done to the sexual harassment law. So this was recently where the center had actually planned to set up a panel of judges, as we saw the couple of videos back, that they're looking on to see for a legal and also the institutional framework to curb the sexual harassment at workplaces following the Me Too campaign. So this was with respect to the early 2013, the Justice J.S. Verma committee. So here he had given a landmark report on gender laws, and he has also recommended setting up of an employment tribunal instead of an ICC, that's Internal Complaints Committee, which has been getting a sweeping changes to the sexual harassment at the workplace bill. So here he wanted to set up an employment tribunal instead of an ICC. So this was one of the important recommendations to what has been coming from the Verma committee back in 2013. And the panel also formed the aftermath in December, that is 2016, the Nirbhaya gang rape case in 2012, and after that is what the Verma committee was been formed in 2013. So this was ensuring that the nationwide protest, and this actually submitted the report in 2013 on January 23rd. So we know that as Nirbhaya gang rape was alarming the entire country, and it was a nationwide protest for the women's safety in Britain. So on limelight of it, the Verma panel was being set up, and the report was being given though with respect to 2013 Jan 23rd. So here at the time of the submission, they had mentioned the sexual harassment at the workplace prevention prohibition and the redressal bill had already been passed by the Lok Sabha, and this was actually awaiting the Rajya Sabha's nod. So this was also being passed unchanged by the upper house a very next month. The month later, even the Rajya Sabha had passed it, but the committee termed that the sexual harassment bill to what was being passed was unsatisfactory, and it did not reflect the spirit of the Vishaka guidelines to what is being given by the Supreme Court back in 1997 to curb the sexual harassment at the workplace. To whatever the bill the particular Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha had prepared on, they were not fulfilling to what the Supreme Court had made up with the Vishaka guidelines. They were not having a kind of reflections of these particular guidelines. So the report also noted that the internal complaints committee had laid down under then the proposed law would be a counterproductive of dealing with such particular claims. In-house could discharge the women from filing the complaint. So this would actually discourage the women from filing the complaints instead. So here the committee proposed forming a employment tribunal to receive and adjudicate all complaints. So this is what they're saying, that instead of having an internal complaint committee, let's have an employment tribunal in return. To ensure the speedy disposal of the complaints, the Justice Verma committee had actually proposed the tribunal, and this would not function as a civil court, but this would be on its own procedures to deal with such each complaint to what has been registered. So this tribunal has to take care to what it has to do, but it will not be executing the function as a civil court. So this was one of the recommendations to what has been coming from the Verma committee. And again you have the kind of it where the committee was broadening the scope of the definition of the sexual harassment. So they wanted to give a broader scope or also the definition which tells to what is an sexual harassment. So here the Verma panel had also said that the employer could be held liable even if he or she facilitated sexual harassment, permitted an environment where the sexual misconduct becomes widespread and also systemic, where the employer fails to disclose the company's policies on the sexual harassment and also the ways in which the workers can file a complaint as well as fails to forward the complaint to the tribunal. So the company would also be liable to pay the compensation to the complainant in written. So they were also talking about what are the works an employer has to do and what are the things that they have to have it, and they have to also forward it to the tribunal. The time they fail to do it, which means that they would be liable to pay the compensation to the complainant in written, so that they're getting it more specified and how the channel has to work on the sexual harassment. So here the panel also suggested to encourage the women to come forward and also to file the complaints. For instance, they should not be penalized for having any false complaints. So he was also opposing that penalizing a woman for having a false complaints was something where it is abusive provision which is intended to nullify the objective of the law. So this was also not being welcomed by the panel, and they also disagreed with this particular statement of penalizing. And the Verma committee panel, that is also, they said that the time limit of the 3 months to file a complaint should be done away with the complainant, and also it should be transferred without a consent. And by not taking a consent, I will not be able to transfer the cases, or you're giving a time limit of 3 months, what doesn't make sense. So this has to be taken away. So these were the other two important kind of suggestions to what has been coming from the Women Committee. So these were the main things to what is being done, and they wanted a very strong sexual harassment law in the place. And also mainly they were suggesting about the employment tribunal, which would be coming in new part. So that's the more focused part. And the next one, the victim of the crime should have a say in the punishment, the Supreme Court. So here the victim of the crime should have a say in the punishments of the criminals, said the Supreme Court in its verdict. So here the victim should have a say in the punishments of those criminals, and this is what has been coming as in judgment from the Supreme Court. So here the bench has actually held the punishment should be meaningful to the victim also. So the punishment to what is being given should be meaningful for the victim also. And we're also trying to sell that it was necessary to seriously consider giving a hearing to the victim while awarding the sentence of to the particular convict. So here they're saying that here the Supreme Court had made it very clear the victim or a family should have an equal say in the punishment of perpetrators. So this would actually impact the statement as well as the impact the assessment must be given with a due recognition, so that an appropriate punishment can be awarded to the convict. So why they're talking about this is because they wanted to take it as a due recognition with a due respect to what is being coming from the victim as well as the family, so that an appropriate punishment can be awarded to the convict in return. So here they're saying that to whatever might be the justice of the rule book, this may not serve the victim in return. And they were also highlighted a statement where the husband of a young married woman, if he is getting killed in a fight or a violent disrupt, or she's a young widow, or she might have in circumstances where she's having a young child as well. So the victim would be with an impact statement or also an assessment might result an appropriate sentence being awarded to the convict, but not necessarily result in the justice to the young widow. So what is perhaps they have to get observed out here is that a rehabilitation of the widow would be much better than ensuring that the criminal gets a life sentence for his crime. So this was a situation to what the Lodha bench had spoken about, and telling that rehabilitation of the widow makes it more specific than even talking about ensuring the criminal to what kind of a life sentence he might get awarded with. So today the rights of an accused has been overweight the rights of the victims of an offence in many respects. So there needs to be some balancing to what has been happening, and they were also looking for a long way to go to bring the rights of the victims of the crime to the center stage and also recognize them as the human rights. So the main ideology to what the verdict has been coming from the Supreme Court is that they wanted to balance as much as possible, and also they wanted to get the victims of the crimes or to get it onto the right channel with the center stage and also recognized as the human rights. So there's a long way to go, but still it has to be taken into considerations and be executed at the earliest. So this is all about it. And next one, and these are the important editorials to what you have to focus for your UPSC examinations. So this is the headers to what is there. So untenable MJ Akbar should have been resigned or else asked to go. The first editorial. Secondly, it's a journalism's after Me Too. It's an open part, and helping the invisible hands of agriculture. So these were the main page articles to what you had. And resistance, India needs to strengthen and implement the regulations of the antibiotic misuse. So here you have on the upper page, when the judiciary rewrites of faith, the imperative of the impact assessment and bonding with Africa in partnership. So these are more important for you to get more focused onto your editorial columns. Just look onto that. And the next news item, the government panel struggles to define the shell company. So here we have the multi-agency committee which has been set up to finalize the definition of a shell company. If you see from quite some times, the shell company where they are repeatedly there in the news, and now the multi-agency committee which has been set up to define to what is a shell company. This is for the purpose of enforcing a penal laws for the various violations is yet to arrive at a consensus to even have a diverse opinions, and also the yardsticks for the identification of such particular entities. How do you find it, and what are the yardstick to identify that these are the shell companies? So the definition is much important for out here. And after a large number of entities classified as a shell company, this has been challenged as a decision, and the government had set up the committee to come up with the definition in written. So the commission has actually drafted a definition that has to be tested on various yardsticks to determine its legal feasibility. So now they have come up with a definition to what is to be called as a shell company, and now this has to be checked on to all circumstances of the yardstick and understand that is this a legal feasibility to determine to be called it as a shell company. So this is about the part where the committee is also examined, where the definition was given by OECD, that is Organization for Economic, Operational and also the Development, which defines the shell company firm as a company that is formally registered, incorporated or otherwise legally organized in an economy, but which does not conduct any operations in that particular economy or in any pass-through capacity. So here the company which is a company formally registered, incorporated or legally organized. So here they are talking about any operation that in the economy other than a pass-through capacity. So the shells tends to be conduits or holding a companies are generally included in the descriptions of the special purpose entities. So this was something where it was defined by the OECD, right? And here you have the consensus where among the committee members for the definition is yet to be arrived. So mutual part, and also the agencies which are been including in the exercise are getting caught up in the investigation because there are a lot of more important cases to what they have to look on. For example, the Nirav Modi cases and the Mehul Chokshis which were been mainly a part of the PNB case, that's a Punjab National Bank. So here the committee members are actually getting diverted to the other important cases to what they have to look on for. So that was one of the reasons why the consensus was not been met yet. And the issue had come up after the government which had tracked down on dummy companies that were used for the round tripping of funds and also the money laundering. So this was where the government actually made a lot of crack down the dummy companies because of the funds and also lots of money laundering which has been happening on the shell companies. So now a video would be played on to understand to what is a shell company. So moving back to the next news item, the Special Forces in India-US exercise. So the first India-US tri-services exercise is likely to take place in 2019. So this is the talks which would be including the special forces of the two countries in a drill. So this was the statement which was being coming from the US defense official. So the three forces of each country are already taken part in terms of the bilateral exercises, but in a separate manner. So their armies which had actually participated in the annual drift were called as UPSC, and the latest edition which took place in September, and the Air Force which took part in the bilateral tape were called as in COP India, wherein the Navy's participation were called as in Malabar. So this was also involving Japan. So these were the three important UPSC, COP India and also the Malabar, where the armies, the tri-services were being taken on a different aspects. They were separately done, but for the first time now all the three would be coming placed together in 2019, and this would include all the services as we discussed, it getting a kind of a scoping of their exercise right now, and this is to be get a service special operation forces. So now the particular area to where we are talking about 2019, there would be tri-services with the US. So this the fixed date has not been fixed yet, but sometimes might happen in the late of August. So this is about it, and you should also know that the drill will mainly focus on the United Nations based scenario and overarching mission of the humanitarian assistance, disaster relief measures and also the brigadier. This was the statement coming from the brigadier. So this was a main focus of the drill in return, and here they also mentioned that India was a natural humanitarian disaster relief hub, so in the Indo-Pacific region, and the Indian Army has Para-SF, Navy has the Moroccos, wherein the Air Force has the Garud as their respective special forces. So these are the special forces to what would be taken part in terms of the drill. So here you don't have much, but just know that as this is being organized, So you should just know their names of the UPSC or the COPE India on the Malabar. This becomes important. So this is just an area to what they're trying to fill up with the news. That's it. The next one, Saudi vows retaliations if punished. So here it's a Saudi Arabia is actually one that it would retaliate against any sanctions if it is imposed over it on the disappearance of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi. So here actually the journalist Jamal Khashoggi has been disappeared on the month of October 2nd, and here now the US has been saying that they would be imposing certain, even before they imposing certain impositions, the Saudi Arabia was telling that if at all it imposes, then it will be retaliating on the issues at the point. So this was with respect to threatening the ally Saudi Arabia on Saturday with severe punishment, because this was already said by the US president, and here it has been critical of the Prince Mohammed was killed inside the Istanbul mission. There was also an issue that the Jamal Khashoggi was being killed inside the Istanbul mission. This was creating a kind of threats, and also the entire other dignitaries are making statements that Saudi might be involved in this. So the kingdom as affirming its a total rejection of any threat or attempts of undermine it, whether through the threats to impose the economic sanctions or the use of the political pressures. So here see here what happens is that since you all don't know much of the news items, so this might be quite an fishy area where you might not be understanding it well. So basically here the statement is very simple. Now the Saudi Arabia is telling that it might retaliate against any sanction if it has been imposed on it just because a journalist has been disappeared. So that was Jamal Khashoggi. So on these statements is what the entire story is going on. So now a small video would be played on to explaining who's Mr. Jamal Khashoggi, what is the connections with Saudi, and what are the problems with USA, and what is the sanctions I've been talking about. Just look on to the video right away.
Last week in Turkey shocked the world. Jamal Khashoggi is a Washington Post journalist and Saudi royal family advisor turned exiled critic. He mysteriously vanished on October 2nd, 2015. The last place he was seen was at the Saudi Arabian consulate in Istanbul, Turkey. He entered, but reportedly never left. Over a week later, little is known about Khashoggi's whereabouts. Turkish officials now fear the worst. They worry that the Saudis murdered the journalist in cold blood when he entered the diplomatic station. But why would Saudi Arabia even want him dead? Jamal Khashoggi wasn't always a critic of the Saudi regime. In fact, he had a history of working very closely with the Saudi government. He even served as an advisor to senior Saudi officials for a time. He graduated from Indiana State University in 1982 before launching his career as a journalist. He even went on to work at various Saudi publications and news channels. He made a name for himself for his foreign reporting from places like Algeria, Kuwait, and Afghanistan during the Soviet rule. He even interviewed Saudi national Osama bin Laden on multiple occasions before bin Laden went on to become the leader of Al-Qaeda. His coverage made him one of Saudi Arabia's leading journalists. He went on to hold several editor positions at leading Saudi newspapers and became the general manager of Al Arab News Channel. Despite his close relationship with the Saudi royal family, his vocal support for reforms often got him in trouble. He was even forced out of several news positions on several occasions. He advocated for equal rights for women, criticized the kingdom's crackdown on human rights activists, and he also called for greater press freedoms. In 2018, Saudi Arabia ranked 169th out of 180 on Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index.
Jamal was always what you might think of as an institutional reformist. He always supported reform. He always supported liberalization.
That was especially true after the new crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, became the de facto leader. Khashoggi fled Saudi Arabia in September 2017 and went into self-imposed exile in the United States.
He really read the tea leaves well on that, because right after he fled, Saudi Arabia, MBS embarked on a massive arrest campaign of any sort of independent voices. Prominent clerics, dissidents, economists, and others were really rounded up in mass, and Jamal probably would have been one of them.
Khashoggi became even more outspoken in his exile. He became a journalist for the Washington Post. He openly criticized the Saudi-led coalition's military campaign in Yemen, as well as Mohammed bin Salman's leadership. But if Khashoggi was in exile and feared the Saudi government, what was he doing in the consulate in Istanbul? Just a note, we want to point out that some of the following information might be disturbing to some of our viewers. Jamal Khashoggi entered the consulate on October 2nd to pick up official divorce documents. Documents he needed to be able to marry his Turkish fiancée. She was waiting for him outside the entrance of the Saudi compound. She was the only witness to see him enter. She waited for 11 hours, but says he never emerged. Days later, Turkish officials leaked information to various news organizations that investigators believe Khashoggi was murdered by a team of 15 Saudi agents. The widely reported allegation is that his body was dismembered inside of the consulate. The Turkish government has not publicly made this claim yet, nor has it released evidence to back up the reports of his alleged murder.
Saudi Arabia and Turkey have had some bumps in their relationship over the last few years. Things haven't been great between the two countries, but I don't think that things between them have descended into sort of open diplomatic warfare, if you will. And I thought, unfortunately, this does have the potential to possibly lead there.
Saudi Arabia denies the reports of his murder. Mohammed bin Salman even responded to the accusations himself, exclusively to Bloomberg News on October 5th. He said, "My understanding is he entered and he got out after a few minutes or 1 hour. I'm not sure. We are investigating this through the foreign ministry to see exactly what happened at that time." Saudi officials claim that the journalist exited using another entrance to the building, but when asked to provide proof of this claim, like security footage, they say the cameras weren't working at the time.
I have a hard time believing that. If they really want to prove that Jamal left the embassy, they should produce whatever evidence that they have that shows that, right? Just saying it is not enough.
The disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi has created international pressure on the kingdom to produce evidence of what happened to the journalist. The US and Saudi Arabia have been allies since the end of World War II, with deep military and economic links, despite obvious differences in approach to human rights. Even one of Mohammed bin Salman's closest allies, President Donald Trump, weighed in.
We do not like to see what's going on. Now, as you know, they're saying we had nothing to do with it. But so far, everyone's saying they had nothing to do with it. And it's inside of Turkey. And the Turkish government is working very strongly so far. So we'll see what happens.
It was later confirmed that National Security Advisor John Bolton and White House Senior Advisor Jared Kushner spoke directly to Mohammed bin Salman on this issue. It's important to note here that Kushner and the Crown Prince have had a particularly close relationship. As international pressure mounts, Saudi Arabia said on the 9th that it will allow Turkish investigators to search the consulate over a week after Khashoggi went missing. But some say this won't be enough to solve the case of his disappearance.
And I think, barring any new revelation, that's just going to always point to some sort of Saudi role in Jamal's disappearance.
The United States has notoriously turned a blind eye to Saudi Arabia's actions in recent decades. But in an era of America First, it's even less likely that the U.S. or the international community will respond.
We'll have to see what happens. I don't like stopping massive amounts of money that's being poured into our country. I know they're talking about different kinds of sanctions, but they're spending $110 billion on military equipment and on things that create jobs and others for this country.
This is the case with...
So that was about it. And the next news item, GST, a 1 year on, firms yet to set up an infrastructure for compliance. So here the corporates are saying that now they're realizing that they're coming to terms with the GST, which means a more drastic change to their tax infrastructure than the basic compliance related changes that they have made so far. So the entire focus was just in trying to get an infrastructure in place so that there was a compliance in GST. So here the most of the IT companies are either help the people to get their returns in place and also utilize the existing bandwidth and teams in their technology, where the departments were helping them to get compiled with the compliance procedures. So now it has been a year which has been passed with the same, and now there is a growing realization that without having a systematic way, which was been missing all these months, to deal with this in terms of the processes, workflows and technology, this is not going to be sustainable. So you need to have a proper systematic way to how to go ahead and deal with this. So for that, the processes, workflows and technology has been more needed. If this is not been needed, then the sustainability would be a question mark. So that there were a growing awareness that they had today is good for the first year of GST, but they really need to start thinking about the transformation in way they look at the taxes and return. So this transformation has to be explained with the means of different things to different companies is very important, because Here the mid or to the large sector segment companies, which is for example they are looking to have a simply upgrading the GST module of their existing tax and also the finance structure. So they were the mid to large segment companies, they were just want to simplify the upgrading GST module and also they wanted to get a proper existing tax and also the finance infrastructure. Wherein the others were fairly global in scale and looking out for the entire workflow and seek to upgrade their entire tax flow workflow in return to be a direct tax, transfer, pricing, indirect tax, compliance, and also they wanted to automate all that in one go. So if it takes 2 years to do so, so this what like the companies to what they are looking out for to how to get compiled with it, it's getting a problematic, wherein mid to large segment companies they're looking out for one go, and the other companies they're trying to get more of to get automated just in one particular go. They don't want it to get delayed on, and moreover this might take another 2 years to do this particular aspect. So here they're saying that on total there should be a proper systematicism and only then the sustainability can be seen for a longer extent. So that's all about it. You don't have anything much out of you. And ILNFS are riddle wrapped in a mystery. So this particular concept of economy would be dealt in a separate video in much more detailed aspects. And the question for the day is, who among the following represents a Republican character of the Indian polity? Choose the correct answer from the quotes which has been given below. Prime Minister, President, Chief Election Commissioner and the Chief Justice of India. Kindly share your answers into the comment sections. It's all about it. Thank you.